Hey everyone. Tonight we don't step into Rome's glory, but into its pit where men bled, beasts staggered, and the air reeked of more than blood. Whispers say gladiators weren't just armed with steel, but with potions roots that made them fearless, wines that twisted their minds, powders that dulled pain until nothing felt real. Some laughed while dying, some fought lions bare-handed, some survived only by feigning death. Doctors swore it was medicine, emperors called it entertainment, and the mob cheered without ever asking what fueled the madness. The truth: it's darker than you think, and carved not in marble, but in bone and residue left in the drains of the Colosseum itself. Stay with me, because behind the sand and spectacle lies a story of blood, drugs, and control that Rome never meant you to know. You stand now at the threshold of history, not in the quiet halls of emperors, but in the clamor and raw energy of a place carved from ambition and stone. Imagine the Colosseum, not as a ruin touched by time, but as it was in its furious prime. A colossal amphitheater of dizzying height, its walls towering perhaps 160 feet into the blue Roman sky. You feel the tremor in the ground, a low thrumming that seems to rise from the very earth, growing in intensity, vibrating through your bones. It's the sound of nearly 50,000 voices, a human ocean of anticipation, a crescendo building towards an almost unbearable pitch. And then, as if a dam is broken, the roar erupts, a single, guttural sound that echoes and reverberates, shaking the very air around you. It isn't a cheer of joy or a cry of triumph, but something far more primal, more demanding. It is the collective scream of blood. The dust motes dance in the shafts of sunlight, slicing through the open roof, illuminating the vast arena, a stage of packed sand where destinies are violently forged and abruptly extinguished. You look down, your gaze tracing the outlines of figures moving within the ring. These are the gladiators, men and sometimes women who, for a fleeting moment, hold the city's gaze. They are not heroes in the traditional sense, not lauded generals or wise senators, but something ephemeral, disposable. The Romans called them single-use celebrities, figures who captivated the masses with their skill and their inevitable demise, only to be replaced by the next wave. Their fame, you realize, was intimately tied to their mortality, a fame that lasted only as long as their breath. Death here, in this grand theater of cruelty, was not met with hushed grief or solemn ritual. No, you perceive it, rather, as a meticulously crafted piece of art, a dark dance. It was choreography, each stumble, each parry, each mortal wound part of a gruesome performance designed to elicit the maximum surge of emotion from the stands. The sand, warm beneath the ceaseless sun, would absorb the crimson hues, layer upon layer, a silent testament to countless endings. You might taste the metallic tang of something heavy in the air. Perhaps the ghost of battles past, the lingering scent of iron and human struggle. Why this insatiable appetite for such brutal spectacle? You consider the emperors, seated in their imperial box, their faces impassive, yet keenly aware of the pulse of the crowd. They understood a simple, chilling truth: a well-fed populace entertained by lavish games was a docile populace. Bread and circuses, they would famously declare, providing just enough sustenance and distraction to quell the rumblings of discontent, to prevent the simmering anger from boiling over into outright rebellion. The emperors were master manipulators of the public mood, and the Colosseum was their grandest tool. a magnificent theater where the anxieties of the empire could be sublimated into a collective frenzy, a shared moment of visceral release. But even bred in circuses needed fuel, a deeper, darker energy to keep the gears turning, to ensure the gladiatorial machine never faltered, never grew dull. You begin to sense it, an almost imperceptible undercurrent beneath the cheers and the cries. Something beyond sheer brute force, beyond the trained skill of a fighter, was at play. There were whispers, subtle shifts in behavior, moments of almost supernatural endurance or terrifying, unhinged aggression. And as you lean closer, listening to the echoes of centuries, you realize that drugs became that fuel, a secret ingredient stirred into the very fabric of the games, designed to amplify the spectacle, to transform men into something more, or perhaps less, than human. It was a macabre alchemy, ensuring the show would always go on, a relentless, intoxicating cycle of blood and applause. You can almost feel the collective breath being held, the question hanging heavy in the ancient air. What forbidden concoctions did they truly swallow before stepping into that fateful sand? You are transported now. From the roar of the arena to the hushed, almost secretive spaces behind the grand facade, the ludus, or gladiator school, where the fighters were housed, trained, and, as you will discover, prepared in ways the public never imagined. The air here is different. It carries the earthy smell of straw, the acrid scent of sweat and liniment, and something else, a faint, medicinal, almost bitter aroma that clings to the rough-hewn timbers and stone walls. Here, in these shadowed courtyards and dimly lit chambers, the gladiator doctors were not merely healers of wounds, mending shattered bones or sewing up gashes with a steady hand. No, they wore another, more complex hat. They doubled, you come to understand, as subtle drug dealers, custodians of a covert pharmacy, their knowledge of roots and herbs twisted to serve a darker purpose than just alleviating suffering. These were men like Galen, whose name would become synonymous with Roman medicine. But in this specific context, his role was far from purely benevolent. You might imagine them, hunched over rough wooden tables, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of an oil lamp, meticulously grinding dried roots, crushing pungent resins, and mixing fine powders into strange, viscous liquids. Their craft was a curious blend, a fascinating and terrifying fusion of what passed for medical science in their era. The careful study of botanicals and anatomy and something akin to ancient witchcraft, where the line between remedy and enchantment blurred. Each concoction had a purpose, a calculated effect designed not purely for health, but for performance, for the dramatic impact it would have when the gladiator finally faced his fate in the ring. The owners of these gladiator schools, often wealthy and powerful men, viewed their fighters not just as human beings, but as valuable investments. A well-trained gladiator, strong and formidable, could fetch an enormous sum, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of sesterces, an amount that could be equivalent to several $1 million in today's economy. And like any shrewd investor, they sought to protect their assets. Drugs, then, became a form of insurance, a way to mitigate risks, to enhance a fighter's capabilities, or perhaps to mask their weaknesses. You might see an owner, a heavy ring glinting on his finger, observing the doctor at work, his eyes calculating, weighing the cost of the ingredients against the potential earnings or losses in the arena. Their concern was not for the gladiator's spirit. but for his continued ability to draw breath and spill blood on command. Galen himself, the renowned physician, penned words that now seem chilling in retrospect. He wrote, almost casually, that a little potion may buy a man's life. You reflect on this, the stark simplicity of the phrase. It implies a transaction, a life purchased not by skill or fortune alone, but by a chemical intervention, a gladiator, weakened by illness or injury, might be deemed unfit for the arena, his life forfeit. But a precisely administered dose, a carefully measured elixir, could temporarily restore him, push him through one more contest, and perhaps allow him to survive another day. The implication is profound. Drugs were not just about enhancing the show, but about manipulating the very odds of survival, tipping the scales in a brutal game of chance. You might hear a faint, distant whisper, a fragment from a diary, an echo of a gladiator's private torment, preserved for centuries. They gave me a drink black as blood if I wake. It means I was lucky. You feel the weight of those words, the stark terror, the utter surrender to an unknown substance, a leap of faith into a darkness that might lead to a brief reprieve or a swift, chemical end. The black drink, tasting perhaps of earth and bitter herbs, was swallowed not with hope, but with a grim understanding of the bargain being struck. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a gladiator's life hanging in the balance, a mere byproduct of these secret pharmacies. And as you contemplate these hidden preparations, you begin to wonder about the more notorious enhancers, the ones spoken of in hushed tones, the substances rumored to have sprung from the most unlikely of places, like the very ground beneath a horse's hooves. You are drawn into the daily rhythm of the gladiator barracks, a stark contrast to the arena's roar. Here, life is disciplined, repetitive, and deeply unglamorous. You notice the heavy, earthy scent of grains, almost a staple in this existence. The gladiators, you learn, were known by a particular moniker, a nickname that spoke volumes about their diet, hordery, or barley men. This was due to the significant role that barley played in their daily meals, primarily consumed as a thick, unappetizing gruel. You might imagine the coarse texture of it, the bland, starchy taste that clung to the palate, a sustenance designed for bulk and energy, not for pleasure. It was the fuel that powered their grueling training, the source of their formidable musculature. But this barley gruel, you discover, held a secret. It was not always as innocent as it seemed. Sometimes, carefully, subtly, it was laced with a potent additive poppy resin. This dark, sticky substance, extracted from the opium poppy, was known for its powerful analgesic properties. You might picture the small, almost imperceptible flecks of dark resin stirred into the simmering pot, dissolving into the blandness, transforming a simple meal into something far more profound. This wasn't merely a dietary supplement. It was a potent medication, an ancient form of pain management administered not for healing, but for endurance. Imagine a gladiator, perhaps during a training bout or in the arena, suffering a wound, a sword cut, 6 inches deep, perhaps even more, slicing through flesh and muscle. In any other context, such an injury would be instantly debilitating, sparking waves of excruciating agony. But for the hordery who had partaken of the poppy-laced gruel, the experience would be different. The opium, you understand, would hit the mute button on pain, silencing the body's frantic alarm signals. You might witness a man, gravely wounded, yet continuing to fight. His face perhaps pale, his movements slightly sluggish, but his focus unbroken. The searing pain, the kind that would make you collapse, would be dulled, transformed into a distant throb, an almost abstract sensation, allowing the gladiator to push beyond the natural limits of human suffering. Modern archaeology confirms these ancient practices. In the damp earth surrounding gladiator barracks, you might envision the careful excavation of broken amphorae, ancient storage jars, their porous clay still holding secrets. Scientific analysis of these fragments has revealed telltale traces, opium residue, clinging to the pottery, a silent, chemical testament to the drugs once stored and consumed within these very walls. It is a tangible link to the past, a concrete piece of evidence that corroborates the whispered accounts and the medical texts of the time. The ground beneath where you stand, you realize, is a keeper of these hushed truths. The image that arises is stark, almost darkly comical in its historical context, yet profoundly serious in its implications. It's as if you're glimpsing a Roman twist on a modern dietary trend, a grim punchline across 2 millennia carb-loading Roman style. You might muse, equal to a simple porridge with a dash of heroin sprinkles. It underscores the brutal pragmatism of their world, where even the most basic sustenance was co-opted for the purpose of spectacle. The quiet, almost domestic act of eating, once a moment of simple nourishment, became another vector for control and manipulation, shaping the gladiator's very capacity to endure. As you reflect on this profound numbing of physical agony, a new, unsettling question arises. What happens? You ponder, when pain shuts down, and an entirely different kind of madness switches on. You step away from the barracks and into the bustling streets of Rome, where the ubiquitous presence of wine pervades every tavern, every household. But the wine you encounter in the gladiator schools, and even amongst the cheering crowds, is not the pure, unadulterated vintage you might imagine. Roman wine, especially the cheaper, more accessible varieties, was often far from a simple fermented grape juice. Instead, you realize, it was a complex and frequently dangerous cocktail. A potent brew that sometimes contained a chilling array of botanical additions, henbane, mandrake, and even the resin of pine trees. You might imagine the bitter, astringent taste that would coat the tongue, masking the subtle herbal notes that concealed a darker intent. This sour, cheap wine, far from being just a common beverage, was transformed into something else entirely for the gladiators. Something grimly functional. It became, in their world, a kind of liquid armor. You might envision a gladiator, his nerves frayed, his muscles aching, taking a deep draught from a rough clay goblet. The wine, thick and perhaps slightly warm, would burn going down, but its intoxicating and anxiolytic properties would quickly take hold. It wouldn't protect him from a sword blow. No, but it would build a chemical shield around his mind, dulling the edge of fear, blurring the stark reality of impending death. It allowed them to step onto the sand not with clear-eyed terror, but with a chemically induced haze of courage, a false bravado born of altered perception. And it wasn't just the fighters who indulged. The very crowds that filled the colossal amphitheater, tens of thousands strong, were often equally immersed in a mass intoxication. You might feel the swell of humanity around you, Hear the boisterous laughter, the slurred shouts, the wild gesticulations. Vendors would move through the stands, offering pitchers of this same doctored wine, and the roar of the mob, you now realize, was often amplified by a collective chemical haze. It created a shared, altered reality, where the spectacle became even more vivid, more immediate, and the moral implications of what they witnessed perhaps less clear. The arena, then, became a stage where both performer and audience were caught in the grip of altered consciousness. For some gladiators, this concoction led to truly terrifying experiences. You might picture a fighter mid-bout, his vision blurring, the sounds of the crowd distorting, the very fabric of reality beginning to unravel. Some reported seeing hallucinations in the midst of their desperate struggle. The familiar faces of the crowd, the imposing architecture of the Colosseum, the glint of their opponent's steel, all could warp and twist into grotesque, impossible forms. It was a terrifying disassociation. A fight for life waged not just against a human opponent, but against the insidious workings of their own drug-addled minds. You hear the echo of a gladiator's chilling confession, a voice from the depths of time. I saw the crowd grow two heads. I cut one, just in case. You feel the profound disorientation, the horrifying logic of a mind under siege, where the line between reality and hallucination evaporated. To them, it wasn't madness. It was a terrifying, undeniable truth. The act of cutting a phantom head, you realize, underscores the sheer terror and confusion that these chemically altered wines could inflict, turning even the most experienced fighter into a victim of his own mind. The thought lingers, a chilling whisper, one wrong sip, and the fog of war could become so dense, so distorting, that you might kill your friend instead of your foe, a mistake easily concealed in the chaos of blood and sand. You are drawn into the realm of ancient superstition and potent botanical lore, to a root whispered about in hushed tones. Both feared and revered the mandrake. Imagine its peculiar form, often bifurcated, resembling a tiny, gnarled human figure, sometimes with an almost eerie resemblance to a wizened man. This anthropomorphic quality, you learn, contributed significantly to the mystique surrounding it. Ancient texts speak of its screams upon being pulled from the earth, a sound said to drive men mad, a powerful legend that underscored its potent, almost supernatural, properties. This was no ordinary herb. It was an entity, a living myth. When ingested, mandrake root was known to induce a profound state of delirium. You might envision a gladiator who has consumed this root, his eyes perhaps wide and unfocused, a strange, disconnected smile playing on his lips. The effects could range from vivid hallucinations to a disquieting sense of detachment from reality. There are accounts of individuals breaking into bursts of unexpected laughter, a chilling, disembodied sound that might echo in the stillness of the night. Perhaps at 3 a.m, a manic, Joker-like cackle emerging from a place of deep, drug-induced euphoria or terror. This laughter, you understand, was not born of joy, but of a mind unhinged, spiraling into unpredictable chemical chaos. Beyond the auditory, mandrake also produced peculiar somatic effects, sometimes leading to a state that the Romans referred to as ghost walking. You might picture a gladiator, his movements fluid yet oddly detached, his steps almost weightless, as if he were drifting above the ground. His body might feel alien to him, disconnected from his will, moving with an eerie, dreamlike quality. This effect, you realize, could be perceived in the arena as a form of supernatural agility, an unnerving grace that defied the laws of ordinary men. It was a terrifying sight. A man moving as if possessed, a phantom amidst the blood and sand. For some fighters, the allure of mandrake was irresistible, a desperate gamble in the face of certain death. They would deliberately overdose, pushing their bodies and minds to the brink, hoping that the delirium would manifest as fearlessness. You might imagine the desperate calculation, the grim determination to conquer terror not through courage, but through chemical oblivion. A gladiator, high on mandrake, would be immune to the screams of the crowd, the glint of the sword, the sheer terror of a charging beast. His world would be so warped, so distorted, that fear itself would lose its meaning, replaced by a strange, often terrifying, inner landscape. Roman texts from the era capture the essence of this drug-induced state with chilling accuracy. Their eyes were mad, their steps like phantoms. You feel the power of these ancient descriptions, painting a vivid picture of men transformed. Their gaze, once sharp and focused, would become wild and unfixed, reflecting the inner turmoil. Their movements, once grounded and powerful, would now possess an ethereal, almost spectral quality, as if they were already halfway to the underworld. The spectacle, you understand, became doubly unnerving for the spectators. You might wonder, looking down from the stands, if the fans had truly bought tickets for a contest of skilled gladiators, or if they had instead unwittingly paid to witness a macabre performance by drugged, shambling zombies, mere shells of men, propelled by a chemical madness. The line between fighter and phantom blurred, and in that blurring lay a deeper, more unsettling truth about the price of Roman entertainment. You descend deeper into the pharmacological shadows of the Colosseum, encountering a drug so potent, so terrifying in its effects, that it truly earns the epithet of berserker's brew. This is henbane, a plant revered for its medicinal uses, yet equally feared for its capacity to unleash primal, uncontrollable aggression. When consumed by a gladiator, henbane did not merely dull pain or induce delirium. It transformed men into blood-crazed beasts, stripping away their inhibitions, their training, and perhaps their very humanity. You might feel a chill at the thought of such a transformation, a quiet dread at the sheer power of this ancient drug. Imagine a gladiator, typically a disciplined fighter, suddenly consumed by an unholy frenzy. His eyes might be wide and wild, his breathing shallow and rapid, his muscles tensed with an almost inhuman energy. Under the influence of henbane, accounts suggest, some gladiators were seen to fight lions barehanded, their bare flesh pitted against the formidable claws and teeth of a massive beast, weighing perhaps 400 to 500 pounds. This was not strategic combat, but a desperate, instinctual brawl, fueled by a chemical rage that defied all logic and self-preservation. You can almost hear the tearing of flesh, the guttural roars, and the frenzied screams that would fill the arena, a testament to the henbane's power. The side effects of this potent drug were as gruesome as they were dramatic, leaving no doubt about the gladiator's altered state. You might envision a man in the throes of a henbane-induced fit, foaming at the mouth, his jaw clenched, his body racked by violent convulsions. Sometimes, a terrifying, hysterical laughter would erupt from his throat, a sound utterly devoid of mirth, an unsettling echo of madness. these grotesque displays, while horrifying to witness up close, only served to amplify the spectacle for the distant crowd, blurring the lines between hero and monster, between a man fighting for his life and a creature consumed by a drug. Roman satirists of the time, observing these terrifying transformations, pondered the unsettling question with sardonic wit: hero or lunatic, who can tell? You reflect on their words, how they capture the profound ambiguity of the spectacle. Was the man fighting with such savage intensity a paragon of courage, defying death itself, or simply a puppet of chemicals, his mind and body hijacked by a potent brew the audience, you realize, was often oblivious to the underlying cause, choosing instead to interpret the madness as divine inspiration or superhuman strength, further fueling their thirst for blood. And then, you hear a voice, a fragment from a gladiator's diary, perhaps scrawled in a moment of fleeting lucidity or grim reflection. I remember my laugh echoing in blood. Then darkness. You feel the chilling impact of those words, the memory of a sound that was not his own, a laugh born of terror and chemical distortion, followed by the merciful oblivion of unconsciousness. It speaks to the terrifying loss of control. The moments when a man became a vessel for something dark and inhuman, driven by an artificial rage. This, you understand, was the terrifying power of henbane. But as you consider these drugs that pushed men to such extremes of speed and violence, you also begin to wonder about the quieter, more insidious substances, the ones that instead slowed the body, calming the nerves for a different kind of fight. You shift your focus now to a different corner of Rome's pharmacological landscape, away from the frenetic energy of henbane and towards a more subtle, less aggressive influence: cannabis. Though not native to the Italian peninsula, cannabis seeds, you learn, were regularly introduced to Rome through the intricate network of Eastern trade routes, carried across vast distances from lands like Persia and India. These small, unassuming seeds brought with them a plant capable of calming nerves and altering perceptions in a far gentler manner than the violent stimulants or disorienting mandrake. Instead of being consumed directly in its raw form, cannabis found its way into Roman life through various applications. You might imagine the careful preparation. The seeds mixed into rich, aromatic oils, then perhaps massaged into weary muscles, or used as a soothing balm. More commonly, you picture the delicate process of drying and preparing the plant material itself, intended to be smoked. The scent of burning cannabis, earthy and distinct, would have mingled with the smells of the barracks, offering a quiet counterpoint to the sharp tang of sweat and liniment. The ritual of smoking, slow and deliberate, would have provided a moment of calm, a brief reprieve from the relentless pressure. For gladiators, especially those designated as venatores, the beast fighters who faced formidable animals like bears, wild boars, and lions, cannabis offered a unique advantage. You might envision a venator before a hunt, his mind buzzing with apprehension, his senses almost too sharp. The haze induced by cannabis, you understand, was not about bloodlust, but about softening the edges of terror, about entering a more detached, dreamlike state. It allowed these fighters to calm their nerves, to reduce the paralyzing grip of fear, enabling them to face the colossal beasts with a semblance of composure. It wasn't about making them fearless, but about making them less afraid, allowing their training to take over without the paralyzing interference of panic. Ancient poets, with their keen observations of the human condition, even alluded to these practices. You can almost hear their words, echoing through time. They danced in smoke, as if dreaming with death. You reflect on the imagery, the elegant, almost ethereal movements of a fighter in a cannabis haze, facing mortality not with frantic desperation, but with a strange, dreamlike acceptance. It painted a picture of men gliding through danger, their movements perhaps slowed, but imbued with a strange, almost hypnotic grace. The smoke, curling upwards into the vast Roman sky, carried with it the hopes and fears of these men, transforming the brutal reality of their existence into something almost poetic. The phrase that playfully encapsulates this ancient practice brings a wry smile to your lips. 20 BC, literally. It's a modern juxtaposition that cleverly highlights the unexpected continuity of human behavior across millennia, connecting the ancient world's pursuit of altered states with contemporary culture. It underscores the timeless appeal of seeking solace or an edge through plant-based remedies, a quiet, almost domestic contrast to the more violent and chaotic substances. This glimpse into the use of cannabis offers a nuanced understanding of gladiator life, revealing that not all drugs were about rage or brute force. Some were about finding a calm, a momentary peace, in the face of overwhelming terror. And yet, for sheer, uncompromising pain relief. Another drug held an unrivaled, potent sway, a true heavyweight in the ancient world. You are now brought back to the profound efficacy of opium, the true heavyweight of ancient pain relief, a substance whose quiet power stood in stark contrast to the arena's roar. Opium gum, you learn, harvested from the milky sap of the poppy, was, in essence, the morphine of the ancient world. Its pharmacological properties were well understood, capable of delivering a profound numbing effect that could silence even the most excruciating physical agony. You might imagine its rich, sweet, yet slightly bitter aroma, a scent that promised oblivion, a temporary escape from a world steeped in pain. For the gladiators, this meant an almost supernatural endurance. Imagine a fighter, his body a canvas of old scars and fresh wounds, suddenly receiving 3 distinct stab wounds in the heat of battle. A normal man would collapse, his muscles seizing, his mind overwhelmed by shock and agony. But under the influence of opium, these gladiators could continue to move with an eerie, almost mechanical precision. Their bodies, though grievously injured, would obey, driven forward by a will chemically detached from the screams of their nerve endings. They became machines of flesh and blood, their human limitations temporarily bypassed. The crowd, you realize, observing these astonishing feats, would interpret them as nothing less than godlike endurance. They would cheer louder, their voices filled with awe and admiration, convinced they were witnessing men blessed by the gods, imbued with an unyielding spirit. The gladiator, bloodied but unbowed, seemed to possess a fortitude that transcended mortal bounds. You feel the weight of this perception, the public's naive belief in heroism, blind to the grim reality that unfolded before them. The illusion was powerful, intoxicating for the spectators, reinforcing their belief in the spectacle's inherent glory. But the reality, you now understand, was far more tragic and complex. This astounding resilience was not a gift from the gods, nor was it solely a testament to an indomitable spirit. It was, in large part, the cold, hard fact of addiction numbing agony. Many gladiators, having been regularly dosed with opium for pain, for performance, or simply to cope with their brutal existence, would have developed a profound physical dependence. Their bodies, accustomed to the drug's presence, craved it, and its administration not only numbed new pain, but also staved off the agonizing symptoms of withdrawal, allowing them to function. It was a vicious cycle, trapping them in a gilded cage of dependence. You hear the faint echo of a gladiator's internal monologue, a voice from the depths of his drug-induced attachment. I heard my blood drip, but my body was no longer mine. You feel the profound sense of alienation, the ultimate loss of self. His own life force, literally spilling onto the sand. Yet his sensory perception so dulled that it became an external event, disconnected from his personal experience of suffering. It speaks to a chilling surrender, a relinquishing of control over one's own physical reality. This was the quiet anesthesia of opium, a powerful narcotic that allowed men to endure the unbearable, but at an incalculable cost. And yet, you reflect, while opium was supreme for numbing pain, the crowd, and indeed some fighters, often craved a different kind of chemical advantage: speed, not just endurance. You shift your gaze from the quiet oblivion of opium to a different kind of chemical impetus, one that sought to ignite the body and sharpen the mind rather than dull it. The Roman world, through its vast trade networks, had access to a surprising array of exotic botanicals. You imagine traders arriving at bustling docks, their ships laden with goods from distant lands, bringing with them cola nuts from the far reaches of Africa, bitter teas from the east, and a variety of odd, stimulating herbs whose names are now lost to history. These were not just curiosities. They were ingredients for a different kind of gladiator preparation. From these imported treasures, specialized brews were concocted, carefully prepared drinks designed to keep eyes wide, to sharpen reflexes, and to send the heart racing with an almost frantic energy. You might envision the preparation, the grinding of cola nuts, their bitter aroma filling the air, the steeping of dark, potent leaves in hot water, creating beverages that tasted strong, earthy, and undeniably stimulating. These were the ancient world's energy drinks, designed to counteract fatigue and inject a surge of vital force into the gladiators before they stepped into the brutal arena. Modern archaeological science, with its meticulous methods, has even corroborated these historical accounts. When gladiator remains are carefully studied, often preserved in conditions that allow for chemical analysis, traces of caffeine-like alkaloids have been detected. These compounds, the very substances responsible for the stimulating effects in coffee and tea today, provide tangible proof that ancient Romans were indeed utilizing natural stimulants to enhance performance. The earth, once again, quietly reveals its secrets, confirming the deliberate efforts to chemically boost these fighters. For certain types of gladiators, particularly the light-armed fighters, those who relied on speed, agility, and quick reflexes rather than brute force or heavy armor, these stimulating brews were invaluable. You might visualize a retiarius, armed with only a net and a trident, or a thraex, with his small, curved sword, their movements swift and unpredictable. Under the influence of these stimulants, they would bounce with an almost goat-like energy, their bodies light, their minds buzzing, their eyes darting, constantly seeking an opening. The caffeine jitters, while potentially unsettling in ordinary life, could be transformed into a hyper-alert state, a heightened readiness for the lightning-fast exchanges of the arena. The thought of such ancient energy drinks, designed for the deadliest of performances, conjures a darkly humorous image, a historical punchline that cuts to the core of this brutal industry ancient Red Bull energy. With guillotine side effects, it encapsulates the desperate gamble, the pursuit of an artificial edge at any cost, where the reward was a fleeting moment of enhanced performance, and the potential consequence was sudden, violent death. These stimulants provided a surge of vitality, a burst of energy to navigate the perilous dance of the arena. Yet, you realize, the most dangerous concoctions were not single ingredients, but the volatile combinations, the mixtures of potions that created cocktails of unpredictable, terrifying death. You are now led to the darkest corners of Rome's clandestine pharmacology, where the dangerous pursuit of spectacle reached its most reckless extreme. This is where individual drugs were not merely administered in isolation, but were combined. A terrifying symphony of chemical chaos orchestrated for the entertainment of the masses. Imagine a potent brew, a speedball of the ancient world created by blending the numbing power of opium, the disorienting effects of mandrake, the savage rage of henbane, and the raw alcohol of wine. It was, you understand, literally chaos in a cup. A witch's brew designed to unlock the most extreme, unpredictable human behaviors. For the gladiators forced to consume such a concoction, the experience was a living nightmare, a terrifying internal maelstrom. Their minds and bodies would swing wildly between extremes. One moment, they might be sluggish, their movements heavy and uncoordinated, the opium dragging them down into a haze. The next, a jolt of henbane and alcohol would seize them, propelling them into a state of manic, unthinking aggression, their eyes wide with a terrifying, drug-induced possession. You might envision them lurching, stumbling, then suddenly exploding into a terrifying, frenzied attack. Their actions devoid of tactical thought, driven only by chemical impulse. And the owners, those calculating figures who treated men as investments and spectacle as currency, loved this unpredictability. You can almost hear their cynical whispers. The crowd pays for madness, the erratic behavior, the sudden shifts from lethargy to explosive violence, the sheer, unhinged quality of the fight, all of it added to the drama, making the contests even more thrilling, more shocking, more captivating for the bloodthirsty audience. It was a calculated risk, a deliberate sacrifice of gladiator control for heightened entertainment, a testament to the callous disregard for human life that permeated the Roman games. This ancient practice, you realize, draws a striking parallel to modern scandals, bridging the millennia with a chilling continuity. Today, we speak of doping scandals in sports like the UFC, where athletes are caught using performance-enhancing drugs. But in Rome, the situation was far more extreme, far more brazen. There was no pretense of fair play, no regulatory body. Instead, you understand, Rome had full drug combos, meticulously or perhaps carelessly mixed to achieve maximum dramatic effect. Consequences be damned. It was a no-holds-barred pharmaceutical experiment, with human lives as the test subjects. You hear the echo of a gladiator's final, harrowing diary entry, a chilling whisper from the grave. They gave me a purple drink I fought in a dream, then saw my own hand on the sand. You feel the profound disorientation, the horrifying detachment, the slow, agonizing realization of his own dismemberment, perceived as if in a distant, drugged slumber. The purple drink, perhaps tinted by berries or other additives, became the gateway to a terrifying, dreamlike battle, culminating in a grotesque awakening to his own mortality. This, you realize, was the ultimate cost of Rome's speedball, a death made all the more cruel by its chemical manipulation. The question inevitably arises, who were the architects of these terrifying cocktails? These doctors who blurred the line between healer and poisoner. You are now compelled to consider the figure of Galen, arguably the most influential physician of the Roman world. A man whose medical treatises shaped Western medicine for centuries. Yet, in the context of the gladiatorial arena, his role becomes profoundly ambiguous. A complex dance between healing and something far more ethically murky. You imagine him, a man of immense intellect and meticulous observation, moving through the gladiator schools, his sharp eyes taking in every injury, every physiological response. He did not merely tend to wounds, he meticulously documented gladiator medicine, carefully recording the effects of various herbs, poultices, and potions. His notes, you realize, form an invaluable, albeit chilling, record of ancient pharmacology. Galen, with his vast knowledge of botanical remedies, prescribed a range of substances to the gladiators. He offered poultices for wounds, seeking to stem infection and promote healing. He provided calming tonics, perhaps cannabis or less potent sedatives, to soothe frayed nerves before a fight. But you also understand that he was deeply involved in the administration of the performance-enhancing drugs discussed earlier. He managed doping not as a covert, illegal activity, but as an ancient sports scientist, experimenting with dosages, observing effects, and continually refining the chemical interventions designed to maximize gladiator performance. For him, the arena was a living laboratory, and the gladiators, whether willingly or unwillingly, were his test subjects. In the eyes of some, particularly the gladiator owners who saw their investments protected and enhanced, Galen was hailed as a savior. He kept their valuable assets in fighting shape, pushing them beyond their natural limits, extending their careers, and ensuring their dramatic impact in the arena. His methods, though sometimes brutal, were effective from a pragmatic standpoint. But for the gladiators themselves, his role was far more complex. You might hear the faint murmur of their discontent, the subtle sarcasm in their voices as they referred to him as the peddler. To them, he was not just a healer, but a purveyor of substances that simultaneously offered fleeting relief and deepened their dependence, blurring the lines between aid and exploitation. The ethical dilemma implicit in Galen's role is profound. You consider the Hippocratic Oath, the foundational ethical principle of medicine, which famously begins with the pledge to do no harm. And yet, Galen's practices, while rooted in medical knowledge, were undeniably contributing to a system that inflicted immense harm, both physical and psychological, upon the gladiators. The brutal truth, you realize, is perhaps best captured by a modern, darkly humorous observation. The Hippocratic Oath never said anything about good show ratings. It underscores the moral compromise inherent in his position, where the pursuit of medical knowledge and the demands of the spectacle intersected in a deeply troubling way. Galen's legacy, therefore, remains bifurcated, a brilliant physician whose insights profoundly influenced medical understanding, yet also a key figure in the institutionalized drugging of human beings for entertainment. His story, you understand, is a powerful reminder that even the most learned can be complicit in systems of exploitation, particularly when power and public demand exert their immense pressures. And as you reflect on the role of this influential doctor, your thoughts turn to those at the very pinnacle of Roman society, The emperors themselves, who took the manipulation of gladiators and the drugging of their circus to an entirely new, chilling level. You stand now in the presence of ultimate power, your gaze drawn towards the Imperial box, where the emperors themselves presided over the spectacles, their faces impassive yet keenly observing the drama below. These were not mere spectators. They were the architects of the entertainment, the ultimate arbiters of life and death, and as you discover, often deeply involved in the chemical manipulation of the arena. Their involvement was direct, personal, and chillingly Machiavellian. Consider the notorious Emperor Commodus, a man who famously styled himself as a gladiator, even fighting in the arena himself. You might imagine his cruel smile as he orchestrated his own victories, ensuring his opponents were drugged into submission before he dispatched them with theatrical ease. This was not a contest of skill or strength, but a grotesque charade, a predetermined outcome manipulated through pharmacological means. The use of drugs here was not just about enhancing performance, but about guaranteeing imperial triumph, about feeding the emperor's megalomania and securing his carefully crafted image as an invincible warrior. It was a profound abuse of power, turning the arena into a stage for personal aggrandizement. Then there was Nero, another emperor whose name evokes images of excess and cruelty. You might envision him, seated in his opulent box, casually handing out wine of courage to gladiators before their fights. This wasn't a benevolent gesture, but a calculated move, a subtle form of coercion. The wine, likely laced with substances designed to induce a reckless bravado or dull inhibitions, served to intensify the ferocity of the combat, to make the gladiators more willing to kill and be killed. It ensured a more dramatic, more brutal show, all for the gratification of the emperor and the mob. It was a chilling testament to how easily the line between a gift and a poison could be blurred in the pursuit of spectacle. The emperors, you realize, were akin to powerful casino bosses, and the gladiators were their drugged pawns. They controlled every aspect of the games, from the matchups to the preparations, including the chemical enhancements. The lives of these fighters were not their own. They were currency, instruments to be manipulated for the greatest dramatic effect. You might feel the sheer weight of this power, the absolute authority wielded by these rulers, turning human beings into disposable elements in their grand, bloody game. Their will was law, and their whims dictated the very biology of the combatants. What truly mattered above all else was the roar of the mob. You feel it again, that immense, guttural sound, the collective voice of thousands. The emperors understood that their power rested on public adoration, or at least public distraction. The more spectacular, the more shocking. The more blood-soaked the games, the louder the roar, and the more secure their rule. Drugs became a vital tool in maintaining this social contract, ensuring a constant supply of thrilling, often unhinged, entertainment. The chemical manipulation of gladiators was not a secret shame, but an integral part of their governance, a subtle lever of control over their vast empire. The phrase that perfectly encapsulates this imperial manipulation is darkly humorous, yet profoundly revealing. Thumbs up meant free refill. It suggests a grim bargain, a silent understanding between the emperor and his chemically enhanced fighters. Victory, or at least a valiant, drug-fueled performance, might earn a gladiator not just a reprieve, but another dose of the very substance that blurred his reality. It highlights the cynical commodification of life and mind in ancient Rome. And as you contemplate these powerful figures drugging men for their amusement, you are left to wonder about the other victims of this pharmaceutical circus. Did the manipulation extend even further, you ask, to the very beasts that face these men in the arena? You now turn your attention to a different class of combatants. Those who roared and clawed their way across the sand, the magnificent and terrifying beasts of the arena. Yet, even these powerful creatures, you discover, were not immune to Rome's pharmacological manipulations. The majestic lions, the ferocious bears, the wild boars, all were part of the vast, intricate machinery of the spectacle. And their behavior, too, could be subtly or overtly altered by drugs. You might feel a pang of sympathy for these animals, forced into an unnatural role, their wild instincts twisted for human entertainment. Records from the era, though fragmented, offer chilling glimpses into these practices. Imagine a group of lions, brought from the sun-scorched plains of Africa, confined in the dark, suffocating holding pens beneath the arena. Instead of their natural grace and predatory focus, you might see them staggering onto the sand, their movements clumsy and disoriented. Ancient accounts explicitly describe drunken lions staggering in sand, a testament to the fact that these noble creatures were often sedated with poppies, their raw power dulled by opium. This was done to make them less dangerous, less unpredictable, and perhaps more easily managed for the sake of the spectacle, ensuring the gladiators had a fighting chance, or at least a more controlled confrontation. Conversely, some animals might have been subjected to the opposite treatment, juiced with stimulants to make them more aggressive, more terrifying, particularly if they were perceived as too lethargic or unwilling to engage. You might envision a beast, its eyes unusually bright, its movements jerky and frantic, fueled by a chemical rush that amplified its natural ferocity. The beast fights, then, were not merely contests of man versus nature. They became complex, live chemistry experiments, where the behavior of the animals was as much a product of human intervention as it was of their innate instincts. The arena, in this sense, became a cruel laboratory, where the lives of both men and beasts were subject to the whims of the pharmacologist. The ultimate, grim punchline of this manipulation resonates with a dark irony. No lab rats use lions. It powerfully encapsulates the utter disregard for animal welfare, viewing these magnificent creatures as mere props, as disposable subjects in a vast, macabre experiment. Their inherent dignity and wildness were stripped away, replaced by an artificial state designed to serve the human appetite for spectacle. The suffering of the animals, you realize, was an unseen, unacknowledged tragedy within the larger human tragedy of the arena. This practice reveals another layer of Rome's deep-seated addiction not just to violence, but to control. The Romans sought to control not only the human performers, but also the very forces of nature, bending them to their will for the sake of entertainment. The drugged beasts became a symbol of this ultimate control, a demonstration of human dominion over the wild. But while the manipulation of animals evokes a sense of sadness, the lingering question returns to the human cost. What happened to these gladiators? These men who were regularly dosed with powerful narcotics, once the roar of the crowd faded and the drugs began to wear off. You suspect, and rightly so, that the ensuing withdrawal in men was far uglier, far more harrowing, than any drugged beast could ever convey. You are led now from the clamor and spectacle of the arena into the stark, often silent aftermath, into the hidden suffering that followed the fleeting glory. Many gladiators, having been routinely administered opium, various drugged wines, and other potent substances throughout their training and combat, found themselves inextricably hooked. Their bodies, accustomed to the constant influx of these chemicals, developed a profound physical and psychological dependence. The roar of the crowd, the temporary surge of courage, the numbing of pain, all these vanished, replaced by a brutal reckoning. The process of withdrawal for these men was a descent into an agonizing hell. You might envision a gladiator, once a figure of strength and ferocity, now reduced to a trembling, broken shell in the quiet desolation of the barracks. His body would be racked by violent tremors, his muscles cramping with a relentless intensity. Vomiting, uncontrollable and debilitating, would leave him weak and parched. But beyond the physical torment, a profound despair would settle upon him, a crushing weight that eclipsed even the memories of the arena's horrors. His mind, once clouded by the drugs, would now be painfully clear, confronting the bleak reality of his addiction and his dehumanized existence. You hear a poignant echo from a gladiator's private anguish, a raw, honest confession etched into the fragile remnants of history. My sword fell from my hand. I shook like a dog in winter, craving the drug more than blood. You feel the profound vulnerability in those words, the absolute surrender to a chemical master, the mighty weapon, once an extension of his will, now too heavy for his trembling grip. His body, once capable of superhuman feats, now convulsing uncontrollably, mirroring the desperate shivering of a starved animal. The craving, you realize, was not for glory, not for battle, but for the insidious comfort of the drug, a desire more potent and consuming than the instinct for survival itself. It was a complete capitulation, a stripping away of his former identity. These men, once hailed as heroes in the blood-soaked sand, celebrated for their courage and prowess, were transformed by their addiction into trembling beggars. You imagine them, their formidable physiques withered, their once proud stances replaced by a posture of desperate supplication. The same hands that skillfully wielded a gladius or a trident would now perhaps reach out, shaking, for a morsel, a drop of the substance that held them captive. The contrast is heartbreakingly stark, revealing the devastating human cost of Rome's relentless pursuit of spectacle. A modern analogy, stark and uncompromising, serves to drive home this brutal transformation: yesterday's Marvel hero, today's alley junkie. It cuts through the romanticized notions of gladiator glory, exposing the raw, unglamorous truth of addiction. The temporary elevation to superhuman status, fueled by chemicals, inevitably led to a precipitous fall, leaving behind men utterly broken and dehumanized. This, you understand, was the grim reality for many who survived the arena, a fate perhaps more terrifying than a swift death. But in this desperate world, even addiction, you discover, could sometimes be leveraged for a cunning purpose. You wonder how some gladiators, pushed to the very brink, used drugs not just to endure, but as clever tricks to survive, to cheat death itself. You are now ushered into the cunning ingenuity of the gladiators, men who, in their desperate fight for survival, learned to twist even the insidious power of drugs to their advantage. The arena was a place of brutal honesty, but also of clever deception. You consider the use of mandrake, that peculiar root that induced delirium and a sense of disconnection. For some fighters, its primary purpose was not to enhance aggression, but to help them fake death. Imagine a gladiator, gravely wounded, his chances of victory fading. Instead of a defiant last stand, he might utilize the effects of mandrake. You picture him collapsing dramatically onto the sand, his limbs slack, his breath shallow, perhaps even a grotesque, drug-induced smile frozen on his face. The delirium, the ghost walking, the unhinged state mandrake induced could be incredibly convincing. A referee, witnessing such a profound, almost lifeless collapse, might call for mercy, believing the fighter to be truly dead or on the brink of it, thereby sparing his life from the final, fatal blow. It was a desperate, high-stakes theatrical performance, a chemically assisted feint. Beyond feigning death, other gladiators learned to numb mortal wounds until the fight had concluded. You envision a fighter, his side gushing blood from a deep cut, his insides screaming in agony. But having consumed opium or a similar potent painkiller, he might continue to fight, his face perhaps pale and strained, but his movements still purposeful. The drug would mute the excruciating pain, allowing him to push through the shock and continue the battle until the very end, perhaps securing a victory or at least a chance at survival that would have been impossible for an undrugged man. Only after the roar of the crowd faded and the adrenaline subsided would the full, devastating force of his injuries make themselves known. Trainers, astute observers of human behavior and pharmacology, were not blind to these chemical advantages. You might imagine them in the quiet corners of the ludus, teaching their prized gladiators not just sword forms and shield blocks, but elaborate pharma feints as calculated tactics. These were not just crude tricks, but sophisticated applications of drug effects, carefully integrated into their fighting repertoire. A gladiator might be taught to time his dose of a particular drug to achieve a specific effect, a temporary surge of manic energy, a numbing detachment, or a convincing facade of collapse, all designed to confuse the opponent, mislead the crowd, and ultimately, to survive. The sheer audacity and cleverness of these tactics evoke a wry, almost celebratory punchline, one that speaks to the gladiator's desperate ingenuity. The first Oscar in history, probably awarded to a drugged gladiator. It captures the essence of this macabre performance art, where survival depended not just on strength and skill, but on a masterful blend of combat prowess and chemical deception. These were the true actors of the arena, turning their suffering and their altered states into a means of defying their predetermined fate. Their lives, you realize, were written not just in skill and bravery, but in blood and in the silent, lingering voices that whispered from the sand itself. You are invited now to lean closer, to strain your ears for the faint, almost imperceptible echoes that cling to the ancient stones of the arena and its surrounding structures. These are not the grand pronouncements of emperors or the lofty words of philosophers, but the raw, unvarnished voices of the gladiators themselves. Fragments of their private torment and brief moments of chemically induced courage, preserved through time. You envision the rough plaster of the barracks walls, perhaps even the damp stone of the tunnels, bearing witness to hasty scribbles, crude carvings, graffiti etched by desperate hands. Here, a faded inscription might read, "Sleep of Poppy." You feel the quiet despair in those words, the longing for oblivion, the grim acceptance of the drug as a necessary escape from an unbearable reality. The poppy, so outwardly beautiful, held the power of both comfort and enslavement, and its sleep, you realize, was a double-edged sword, a respite from pain, but also a surrender to dependence. It speaks to a profound weariness, a desire to simply cease to feel, if only for a few hours. Elsewhere, you might find fragmented letters, a broken piece of pottery, a message half erased by time, hinting at wine of courage. You taste the metallic tang of fear and the bitter promise of false bravado in those 3 words. It underscores the gladiators' profound need for something to bolster their resolve, to dull the edge of terror before facing certain death. This wine, you know, was not a celebration, but a grim sacrament, a chemical fortification for the ultimate sacrifice. It was a desperate measure, a way to trick the mind into facing the unfaceable. Another scrawl, perhaps more defiant, more resigned, speaks volumes. Better drunk than afraid. You feel the raw, almost defiant pragmatism in this simple declaration. It strips away any romantic notions of heroism, revealing the stark truth of their choice. To face the arena sober, with all the crushing weight of fear and despair, was perhaps a fate worse than death itself. Better, then, to surrender to the blurring effects of alcohol and other substances. To enter the fray with an altered mind, insulated from the full horror of their reality. It was a desperate coping mechanism, a way to survive the mental torment, even if it meant sacrificing clarity. And perhaps, most chillingly, you decipher a phrase that speaks to the ultimate disassociation. The root made me laugh at death. You feel the skin prickle on your arms at the thought of such an experience. A forced, grotesque mirth in the face of annihilation. This laughter, you understand, was not born of genuine joy or even courage, but of the mandrake's disorienting power, turning terror into a distorted amusement. It highlights the profound irony and tragedy of their existence, where even their emotional responses were chemically manipulated, their humanity subtly eroded. These are the rare human voices, you realize, whispering through blood-soaked walls, fragile echoes from a distant past. They are the testament of the men beneath the helmets, the individuals behind the myth, revealing their vulnerability, their dependence, and their profound despair. These aren't stories of glory, but of survival, of chemically induced courage, and the quiet dignity of acknowledging their own terror. And as you absorb these intimate confessions, a new question arises. You ponder, did the cheering mob, witnessing these drug-fueled spectacles, perceive these men? And what was their own role in this chemically altered reality? You are once again immersed in the throng of the Roman crowd, but now you observe them with a deeper understanding, realizing that the chemical haze of the arena extended far beyond the gladiators themselves. The spectators, too, were often partaking in a vast, collective intoxication, turning the Colosseum into something far more akin to a mass rave than a sober athletic event. You feel the surge of their excitement, amplified by their own chemical consumption, and understand how it contributed to the feverish atmosphere. As you stand among the thousands of eager faces, you realize that the drugged wine, so prevalent in the gladiator barracks, was also readily available to the public. Vendors, moving through the tiered seating, would hawk their wares, and the crowd would guzzle these potent libations, the alcohol dulling inhibitions, the herbal additives perhaps subtly altering perceptions. But it wasn't just wine. You might notice the small, unassuming snacks being passed around, perhaps cakes or sweetmeats, secretly spiked with various substances. These were the ancient world's party favors, designed to enhance the sensory experience of the games, to heighten emotions, and to make the gore even more thrilling, more palatable. The arena, you understand, became an enormous, pulsating party, a mass rave where thousands of people were simultaneously experiencing altered states of consciousness. The air would be thick not only with dust and the smell of blood, but with the collective exhalations of alcohol, and possibly the subtle aromas of cannabis or other psychoactive herbs. You feel the rhythmic sway of the crowd, their heightened emotions, their shouts and cheers becoming a single, deafening roar, imbued with a raw, almost primal energy. It was an environment designed for maximum sensory overload and emotional release, where the boundaries of normal behavior were dissolved. Roman satirists, with their keen and often cynical observations of society, did not miss this aspect of the games. They famously derided the spectacle, describing the crowds as drunks in the sand, highlighting the collective inebriation that fueled the mob's bloodlust. You reflect on their words, how they peel back the facade of civic virtue, exposing the underlying reality of a society indulging in a shared, chemically induced frenzy. The cries of "kill, kill" that echoed through the vast amphitheater, you now realize, were often born not just of entertainment, but of a profound, collective intoxication. A mass delusion that blurred the lines of morality and human empathy. The punchline that neatly encapsulates this historical phenomenon is both shocking and amusing. Ancient Rome was like Tomorrowland, with gore. It powerfully draws a parallel between a modern electronic music festival, with its lights, sound, and altered states, and the Colosseum, with its brutal gladiatorial combat. Both created immersive, emotionally charged environments. But Rome's version came with a grim, visceral reality of death and suffering. The crowd, you understand, was not merely watching a show. They were participating in a chemically enhanced experience, their own minds manipulated, making them complicit in the brutal spectacle in a way they may never have consciously realized. This shared intoxication, you realize, meant that the exploitation of gladiators went even deeper, transforming them into unwitting subjects in a far more chilling form of experimentation. You are now led to a chilling realization about the gladiatorial system, one that transforms the arena from a mere theater of combat into something far more sinister, a live, human laboratory. The esteemed doctors, those like Galen who tended to the gladiators, were not just treating injuries or doling out performance enhancers. You learn that they were, in fact, testing herbs and various pharmacological compounds on these fighters, systematically observing their effects, before daring to prescribe similar treatments to the elite citizens of Rome. The gladiators, you realize, were quite literally human guinea pigs in a grand, often brutal, medical experiment. Imagine the quiet, clinical detachment with which these doctors would operate. The arenas, the ludi, and the adjacent medical facilities doubled as medical laboratories, where controlled environments, crude as they were, allowed for observation. A gladiator, recovering from an injury or simply identified as a suitable subject, would be given a specific trial potion to drink. The doctor would then meticulously record his physiological responses, heart rate, level of consciousness, pain sensitivity, and, crucially, his performance in subsequent training or combat. Every grim detail, every convulsion, every moment of unnatural strength became a data point in their ancient scientific inquiry. The choice, for the gladiators, was rarely a choice at all. They were often forced to drink these experimental concoctions, their lives already forfeit to the system, their bodies deemed expendable in the pursuit of knowledge or improved performance. You might envision the forced administration, the gladiator swallowing the bitter liquid with a grimacing face, knowing that his survival or death would simply become clinical data. It was a cold, calculated exploitation, a profound violation of autonomy, where human beings were reduced to biological variables in a cruel equation. Their survival, or their unfortunate demise, was viewed through the lens of scientific success or failure. If a gladiator survived a particularly potent brew, recovering from its side effects or exhibiting a desired enhancement, it was considered a success, a validation of the herb's efficacy, making it potentially suitable for the more esteemed Roman citizens. If he died, his death was simply a data point, an unfortunate but necessary outcome in the pursuit of knowledge. The ethical void, you realize, was vast and profound, highlighting a shocking disregard for the value of individual human life. You hear the stark, almost terrifying confession from a gladiator's diary, a testament to his own unwitting participation in these experiments. They called it divine potion. 10 men died. I lived. That meant success. You feel the chilling impact of those words, the absolute clarity of the gladiator's understanding. He knew he was part of a trial, that others had paid the ultimate price, and that his own survival was not a miracle, but simply a fortunate outcome, a validation for the doctor. It encapsulates the cold, dehumanizing logic of this ancient medical practice, where human lives were weighed against scientific discovery. And as you contemplate these profound violations, you wonder how long these dark secrets truly remained buried. Did the earth itself, you ask, hold on to the evidence of this widespread addiction and exploitation, offering silent, archaeological proof for future generations? You are now brought to the quiet, methodical work of archaeologists, scientists who, millennia later, began to unearth the silent truths of Rome's gladiatorial past. The ground beneath the Colosseum, the barracks, and the burial sites of these fighters became a vast, intricate archive, holding secrets whispered not in words, but in chemical residue. You imagine the careful excavation, the patient sifting of soil, the gentle handling of ancient remains, all guided by the promise of scientific revelation. When the bones of gladiators were meticulously analyzed, scientists discovered something remarkable, something that confirmed the ancient whispers and medical texts' traces of alkaloids. These complex organic compounds, you understand, are the active ingredients in many psychoactive drugs. Finding them within the very bone structure of these ancient fighters provided undeniable proof that they had regularly consumed potent substances. It was a tangible, chemical signature of their drug-laden existence, a silent testament to the daily pharmacology that shaped their lives and deaths. Beyond the bones, the archaeologists also unearthed burial urns, vessels designed to hold the ashes of the deceased. Within these unassuming containers, scientists discovered telltale opium residue, clinging to the pottery, perhaps mixed with the remnants of ceremonial offerings. You picture the careful collection of these fragments, the painstaking analysis, and the dawning realization that even in death, the insidious grip of opium clung to these men. It was a poignant reminder that their addiction was a fundamental part of their identity, following them even into the afterlife. And perhaps most revealing of all were the drains of the Colosseum itself. The humble, unseen channels that carried away the detritus of the grand spectacle. These ancient pipes, once flushing away blood, water, and human waste, became remarkable time capsules. Scientific analysis of the sediment collected from these drains revealed a pharmacological cocktail traces of cannabis, likely from oils or smoked residue, and the unmistakable remnants of mandrake wine, its potent properties still detectable after centuries. You imagine the quiet astonishment of the scientists, finding such clear, undeniable proof of ancient drug use literally flowing beneath the grand stage of Roman entertainment. The science, you realize, confirms the wild, ancient accounts, corroborating the sometimes exaggerated tales and the clinical observations of Galen. The whispers from the walls, the vague historical mentions, the diary fragments, all are now given concrete, irrefutable validation by the cold, hard data of modern archaeology. It is a powerful moment, a triumph of scientific inquiry that strips away the romanticism and reveals the brutal truth. The punchline, delivered by the earth itself, resonates with profound finality. The Colosseum didn't just leak blood, it leaked drugs. It was a chemical theater, a grand stage of chemically altered states, and its legacy, you realize, is far more complex and troubling than simple glory. You stand at the culmination of this journey, looking back at the vast expanse of Roman history and reflecting on the profound, unsettling legacy of its gladiatorial games, the systematic drugging of gladiators. You realize, foreshadowed a dark pattern that would echo through centuries, a precursor to the modern doping scandals that plague sports today. Rome, in its insatiable thirst for spectacle, set a precedent for sacrificing the integrity of human beings for entertainment, creating a blueprint for exploitation that continues to haunt our collective conscience. This ancient empire, with all its advancements in law, engineering, and culture, ultimately valued spectacle over humanity. The lives of gladiators were expendable, their bodies and minds mere tools to be manipulated, enhanced, and ultimately consumed by the masses. You feel the weight of this moral compromise, the chilling calculation where the roar of the crowd superseded any ethical consideration for the individual. It was a society that, at its core, normalized cruelty and dehumanization, packaging it as grand entertainment. And the drugs, you understand, were not a peripheral detail. They were essential. These substances, opium, henbane, mandrake, the stimulating teas, the potent wines kept the circus alive for centuries. They blurred the lines between man and beast, between courage and madness, between life and death. Without them, perhaps the spectacle would have lost its edge, its captivating brutality, and the masses might have grown restless, turning their attention from the arena to the emperor's palace. Drugs were the grease in the gears of the Roman entertainment machine, ensuring its smooth, horrifying operation for generation after generation. In this pervasive system, addiction, manipulation, and cruelty became utterly normalized. For the gladiators, addiction was a daily reality, a silent companion to their training and combat. For the owners and emperors, manipulation was a tool of control, a means to achieve desired effects. And for the vast Roman populace, the cruelty was simply entertainment, a celebrated aspect of their culture. You feel the insidious creeping of this normalization. How readily a society can embrace practices that, in a different light, would be deemed barbaric and abhorrent. The ultimate conclusion, stark and uncompromising, resonates through the ages. The empire ran on bread, blood, and narcotics. It's a powerful summary, laying bare the true pillars of Rome's enduring power, not just its legions or its laws, but its ability to feed and entertain its populace, using a potent cocktail of sustenance, violence, and chemical control. This was the hidden fuel that powered a civilization, a dark undercurrent beneath the marble and the military might. As you step away from the shadows of the Colosseum, from the whispers of drugged men and the echoes of cheering crowds, you are left with a profound question, one that lingers long after the sand has settled and the last roar has faded. If Rome's heroes fought high, if the very fabric of their most celebrated entertainment was woven with threads of addiction and manipulation, what, you ask, does that truly say about the empire that cheered them on? And indeed, about the enduring human appetite for spectacle at any cost?